Hello, everyone. Omar Ramos here. Thank you so much for participating in Latinos Progresando's Mex Talks series. We'll get you to our scheduled program, but I want to take this opportunity to talk about the organization that's bringing you this unique event that celebrates the history, contributions, and rich diversity of the Mexican culture in the United States. Latinos Progresando is a critical organization right here in Chicago, and so much of the work is ensuring Chicago families have the access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. From supporting parent leadership and small business development, hosting community events that promote mental and physical wellness, and opening the doors for community members to have access to transportation and green space, LP is rooted in building on the community strengths. LP's reach extends beyond Chicago's southwest side as they provide immigration legal services to thousands of families every year from 22 states in the USA and more than 40 countries around the world. While a lot of LP's programming is built on a visionary framework to open up new opportunities for the community, the organization also takes the lead to meet immediate needs in times of crisis. This has never been more true than during COVID-19. As just a few examples, LP has mobilized to provide close to 30,000 units of PPE and 100,000 in financial assistance to families and small businesses, answer urgent immigration questions via a hotline, and serve more than 3,000 families in a weekly pop-up food pantry. Going above and beyond is in Latinos Progresando's DNA, and it all started with just one guy trying to help people. It is my pleasure to introduce to you LP's founder and CEO, Luis Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. When Latinos Progresando created Mex Talks, we set out to create a platform that would celebrate Mexican culture, highlight everything that Mexicans bring to this country, and use Mexican voices to tell Mexican stories. This is our 8th year hosting Mex Talks, but our first time going virtual. Our community has faced a lot this year, and it's taking a lot of hands and hearts to respond. While times like this remind us of our vulnerability, they also remind us how selfless and resilient our community is. That's why, for this year's Mex Talks, we wanted to talk about our own power to heal. Before I introduce today's lineup, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Constellation Brands, and all of Mex Talks 2020 sponsors.
Good afternoon. On behalf of everyone at Constellation Brands and our Corona and Modelo distributors, we would like to welcome you to this last session of Mex Talks 2020. I'm sure you would agree they have all been terrific. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate and commend Latinos Progresando for their wonderful work in the Mexican community. Constellation Brands is proud and honored to be their partner. Mex Talks 2020 has provided such thoughtful and provocative thinking for all to consider and take action towards. Yes, these are challenging times, but that fighting spirit and never give up attitude that exists in all of us will be the difference maker today and for generations to come. Thank you, Latinos Progresando, and to the entire Latino community. You have Constellation Brands respect, admiration, partnership, and most of all, support, now and forever. Salud.
Today's event is a special one. All of the panelists have roots in Chicago's Little Village community, including our moderator and friend, Edgar Hernández, Assistant Director of SEIU's Department of Strategic Initiatives. Enjoy.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Buenas.
Buenas tardes, and thank you for joining us, and gracias por acompañarnos. As previously mentioned, my name is Edgar Hernández, and I have the honor of serving as a moderator for our discussion with this great set of panelists. It will focus on the themes of roots, values, and power from the panelists' experiences and their ties to the Little Village community. I'm really excited about this panel and hope you can join the conversation in social media by using the hashtag Mex Talks. Now let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Celina Villanueva, State Senator for the 11th District of Illinois. We also have Jackie Serrato, barrio journalist and editor of the Southside Weekly and La Voz, a publication of the Chicago Sun-Times. And last but not least, Rodrigo Garcia, Deputy Treasurer and Chief Investment Officer for the Office of the Illinois State Treasurer. And once again, my name is Edgar Hernández. For those of you that are joining us that are not familiar with the neighborhood, let me provide a little bit of background before we get started. The Little Village community is located in the southwest side of Chicago. For many years, it's been a port of entry for Mexican immigrants, including my own family. After World War II, Czechoslovakians and Bohemians were the dominant ethnic group in the community, and their businesses lined the 26th Street shopping district. Mexicans began settling into Little Village in the 1960s, and thus beginning to change in the community demographics. 26th Street now is one of the most vibrant and highest grossing commercial districts in the city. It's a resilient community with many small mom and pop stores, entrepreneurs that own tire shops, quinceañera boutiques, bakeries, and restaurants. It's a blue collar and working class community with a significant immigrant population that as of the 2010 census was home to 75,000 residents. It has its challenges such as overcrowding, drugs and gangs and crime, and issues related to health and the environment. Unfortunately, the Little Village community had one of the highest positivity rates in the city during as a result of COVID-19. And the recent fiasco with the Hilco project and the demolition of the old ComEd factory resulted in a cloud that enveloped certain parts of the neighborhood. All of the panelists, including myself, have a deep conviction to this community. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. What is your family story, and how did they arrive to Chicago? Senator Villanueva, would you get us started?
I'm gonna act like I didn't notice your phone going off several times, Edgar, because I actually that gave me the notice that I needed to turn off my alerts because I know mine ring that loud as well. So my immigration story, I am very careful at claiming a long-time little villager because my immigration story and the immigration story of my family starts in Westtown. Which is where particularly my family members, because both my parents are from Durango, Mexico, had friends and family that were living there. So that's where they arrived when they first got here. So about Chicago and Ashland, Marshfield, and a lot of, streets in between is kind of where our story started. And I was born when my family was living at a house on the north side of the city of Chicago in Hermosa. And I grew up there and was living there until I think about second grade, which I think maybe the year or two prior, my tia had actually moved and bought a house in Little Village. And so my parents, when they felt like they were financially able to move out of my grandparents' house, because my grandparents up until a couple years ago still lived in Hermosa in that 3-story house, where all my tios and tias and all of us lived all together. When they were looking for a house, they looked at Little Village. It had what they need in terms of the grocery stores and the community, people who spoke their language, but then also just the sense of a neighborhood. And I think that's something that was really important for them, and green spaces, because, we moved right by a park. And so, it really was that. And we've been here since the 90s. So I am very careful to claim my longtime Little Villager status, but I don't want to, perpetuate something, because people from Little Village will check you real quick. So that's why I'm very careful with that.
Great, thank you, Senator. Jackie, would you mind sharing your story?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Little Village. My family is from Guanajuato, Mexico. My parents were born there. And I'm talking about South Guanajuato, so really close to Michoacan. And I think that's important because culturally, we're much more like Michoacanos than we are from León, Guanajuato, if that makes any sense to people. Mi familia, mis abuelos, cuidaban vacas y chivas, cosechaban milpa, right? But as living off of the land became more difficult, due to neoliberal policies and a corrupt government. Both of my grandfathers became bracero workers in the mid 20th century. And both of them, particularly my maternal grandfather, made it to Chicago to work in the steel mills and the railroads. Both of my parents arrived a few years later to Chicago, a couple decades later in the early 80s. And they obtained their residency through the 1986 amnesty. And I was born a year later. So I was the first US born citizen in my family. I was born on 32nd and Lawndale. My earliest years I spent in K-Town. I think it was Keeler, right next to Perchowski Park. But my formative years, my youth, and where I had most of the experiences that shaped me were on 26th and Sawyer. That's what I consider my block. And it wasn't until high school that my parents bought a house in the South Side. And ever since, I've lived in various parts of the South Side. I'm 47th, I'm 63rd, I'm 55th. But I always keep coming back to Little Village. And my hope is to make Little Village my permanent home in the near future.
Great, thank you. And Rodrigo.
Gracias, Edgar, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone again. You know, my story, just like the story of our fellow panelists here, is one that, you know, is rooted in humility, one that is rooted in, you know, this whole notion of dynamism. You know, my parents came here from Mexico in the 1970s. They didn't know each other, so they came individually and separate. My mom came from Durango. I know that there's a good nexus of Durango folks on here. And then my dad came from La Sierra that's in between Durango and Sinaloa. And so they came here one in the early 70s, the other one in the mid 70s. And it is interesting because when I talk to my father today, he likes to say he came here a number of times. And why do I say that? Well, because he was deported, and he was, the La Migra caught up to him on 26th Street, and just like most of our ancestors have come before us, they made the decision to come here, once over and over again until they were able to attain legal status in the mid 1980s, and then became permanent and therefore U.S. citizens later on. I grew up on 30th and St. Louis. It's where I spent nearly 2 decades of my lifetime there. I was a very, very young kid. I did live a couple years over on 27th and Keeler, but I was like 3-4 years old. I barely remember that. The rest of my life has always been on 30th and St. Louis. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was 6 of us, myself and my 3 siblings and my mom and dad. And me and my brother would sleep on a mattress on the living room because my sister and my little brother slept in a separate room. And that was how we made it work. Eating home cooked meals every day. And maybe if we were lucky on a Sunday, we would be able to go to McDonald's and get 2 for $2 Big Mac. But that's it, just 2 for $2 Big Mac. We would then have to go across the street to La Justicia and be able to go and buy a 3-liter of RC because that was the cheapest thing around, cheaper than Coke as well. Anyway, my mother had an 8th grade education. My father had a 6th grade education. And, through all that, they were subjected to discrimination, to harassment, to wage theft because they were undocumented and because they were Mexican. But it is a story that many of our families, many of our family friends continue to have even today. And so, I'll mention a couple other things. One of the things that makes Little Village special to me is that when my dad was injured back in the 90s and he couldn't work, at least not in a factory where he was, subject to backbreaking work, we bought a pickup truck and we started collecting scrap metal. So have you ever seen those pickup trucks collecting fierro viejo on the back? Well, we were one of those early pioneers And we would pick up scrap metal, refrigerators, stoves, bathtubs, old rims, and we would go sell it for 2 cents a pound. And that is how we were able to put food on the table, and how my parents, early on worked really hard to break away from it. And it's fond memories because we would go up and down the alleys of Little Village in our 1964 red Ford pickup truck. And if you ever seen those old episodes of Sanford and Son, I always, I remember seeing that when I was a little kid. I was like, hey, Dad, I'm like, that's us, collecting scrap metal. And so Little Village has always held a special place in my heart. And really the only time or the time that I needed to leave was when I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps and I had to deploy overseas. But otherwise, it's always been a part of my experience and a part of who I am today.
Great, thank you for sharing those wonderful stories. And just to piggyback on that theme there that you finished up with, Rodrigo, would you mind sharing some of your more cherished memories of growing up in Little Village, and also something that may be also recent for yourself, Celina Villanueva, as well? Let's start with Jackie.
Cherished memories. Well, people who know me know that I like community murals. And part of the reason that I became, I guess, a fan of public art was because the house that I was living in was literally the house that's right next to the mural on 26th and Sawyer. If you're familiar with 26th and Sawyer, there's a very prominent mural there by Pilsen-based Aurelio Diaz. And I have very early memories of the mural going up. I don't know how old I was. I must have been, 4, 5, 6, something like that. I was a very young kid, and it has such a great impact on me just because I knew that the mural meant something. It wasn't just a commercial. It wasn't just decoration. I knew that there was a political message behind that mural, and that it was meant to represent our community. And I mean, for those of us who grew up in Little Village in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, there were very few things that would reaffirm our culture in a positive way. And so I think murals, political murals, Chicano murals, are one of the strengths of Little Village, one of the features that I'm always going back to, that I'm always thinking about. And then there's a bunch of other memories, like, before social media, I feel like block parties and daytimes and socializing, well, it was badass. Things have changed. The Mexican community is much more dispersed now across the city. But I really just love the way that people are able to come together, to empower ourselves, given that, many times we cannot count on our local government or our elected officials, especially back in the day, to represent our needs and to represent our view of the world. And so anytime that we're able to come together as a community and create community, I think that's probably the most beautiful and valuable aspect of Little Village to this day.
Thank you. Rodrigo.
Yeah, that's a great question. It brings up so many fond memories. I recall, and even still to this day, walking around Discount Mall. And for those of you who are young, I remember when Discount Mall used to be an Ames, and even before an Ames, it used to be a Venture. And you don't know what an Ames or a Venture store, they're just 2 department stores. So, for me, I get a lot of joy from just walking around, not only seeing the vendors, their work ethic, but smelling, the food, some of the foods that are being cooked up, the music playing in the foreground, the people walking around busy. I remember, I have fond memories of walking up and down 26th Street. I remember when Gold Blast used to still be there, when there was still a Woolworth on 26th and Pulaski. I remember when we still have El Club El Boston on 26th and St. Louis. I remember cruising on Saturday nights, bumper to bumper traffic, and then being able to have conversations as people would be blasting, their music, whether it was rancheras or norteñas or house music or freestyle or classics. I remember the Boys Club on 28th and Ridgeway, which I spent a lot of time until I was 13 or 14, when I became a much more of a teenager, and then had to confront the issues of street gangs between the Latin Kings and the 2-6. I remember block parties, as was alluded to earlier, or even sometimes they didn't even need a block party. We would, take over a street pump and then put a tire around it and have, a big, water party in the middle of the block for all the kids. I remember, and the last thing I'll mention, I remember trick-or-treating, going all the way from 26 and Kedzie, or 26 in Albany, right at the on the Stalarco, all the way to 26 in Costner, and then coming home with huge bags of candy, because you didn't have to really knock on on doors at house store. You would just go to every business, and every business would always go there, whether it was panaderias, taquerias, or any other type of business that was out there. And for me, that is the fondness of the memories that make Little Village such a very special place to live even today.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Senator, would you like to share a story of Little Village that you cherish?
I mean, I'm in Little Village right now. So I'm literally out of my window. I live right by Petrowski Park. So I'm seeing like the neighborhood still be the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It's really funny because I feel like there's so many. I think for all of us, there's like 1,000,001 things. And I think, the things for me is like my favorite time is always summertime, because you get to open up the windows and you get to breathe in the sense of the neighborhood. The arrachera that like literally my neighbor was grilling on Sunday that like made me really, really hungry. And I was like really, really close to being like, hey, where's my plate? But it's stuff like that. I think like for me, the most cherished moments have been when I walk into La Chiquita and the lady at the bakery, in the bakery area that like puts the, the pan in the bags, mm-hmm. asks about my mom or about my dad. When I go into one of the businesses, like El Faro or even at Totonilco, and the guys already know what I'm going to order, or, like I go into, one of the other restaurants that I'm constantly going to, and they already know, and they're like, we got you. And not because I'm a senator, but because I've literally been going there for so long. Mm-hmm. When I go to, the elotero down the block that I know sets up, all the time, or the paleteros that stop by, the house, it's stuff like that I think for me has always been like the most cherished. When the mechanic who works behind my house will see like our garage door left open because my dad like kind of ran out in a hurry and forgot to close the door, or the garage door didn't close completely, he'll go close it. And he'll let my dad know, like, hey, just wanted to let you know. I think for me, the most cherished memories are the moments where our neighbors and our community folks are really looking out for one another, because that's what makes a difference. When we're checking in and you might not necessarily know each other's full names and each other's full backstories, mm-hmm. but it's the fact that it's like, you're a part of me and you're a part of this. And this is a collective we that's special to us. I'll be honest with you, like that's kind of the most cherished things that I have. Like, I mean, Little Village for me means so much in so many different ways. Like my tia, my cousins live 2 blocks down from me. I have alley neighbors that I know that I'm really close with. One of, the señoras that, is always calling me because she's like, mija, I need this and I need that. And, she knows that I got her, also lives a couple blocks down. And that for me that's the most cherished thing that I have about Little Village, is that it's still very much my home, but it's this sense of we got each other. And even in the hard times and even in the bad times, we still got each other, and we're still going to have each other. And even when we're pissed at each other, we're still going to have each other. So for me, that's what I cherish the most, is this is home.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And then, so just continuing on that theme, then, what are some of the lessons that you learned from the neighborhood and from your families that you apply in your daily work, that people may not even realize that, oh man, they got it from the neighborhood, or this is just, the values that their family instilled in them? Let's go ahead and start with Rodrigo.
Yeah, it's a great question because it is those lessons, it is those formative years that really shape our core values and really shape who we are as individuals. For me, I remember, being very young and beginning to understand the world around me. The lack of economic opportunity extended to our community early on, due to systemic and structural barriers that existed and have been placed on our community. But I also saw the work ethic of what it meant for our, our neighbors and our family members and our parents who were able to overcome, many of these barriers in order to make it work, whether it was work in construction, whether it was working in factories, or whether it was working in offices, or even, if they had to make ends meet, whether it was, picking up fierro viejo or becoming entrepreneurs on the street, like elotero, carts. It was about overcoming adversity and this whole, this whole drive for success, this whole notion of entrepreneurial spirit, and that continues to bind many of our communities by putting ideas to work and being willing to do what it takes in order to make it work. This whole notion of innovation and ingenuity that we had to come up with in order to make ends meet, in order to be able to find our place in the world, in order to be able to progress forward. It's about understanding people's plight, not just those who just came to our beloved country as immigrants, but even first generation, and understanding the barriers and the issues that they face on an everyday basis. All those things help shape who I am today. I often like to say, we march on the streets, we protest, we vote, we demand a seat at the table. So it is incumbent upon people like us who have a seat at the table to break down the systemic and structural barriers that keep our people from participating. That is why, those lessons are so instrumental. So we're able to take those voices of the unheard and be able to put it into the work that we do, not only today, but also in the future. I could tell you, all the types of, different rooms that I've been in, making decisions that impact the Mexican community or the Latino community at large, or people of color at large. And that is why it's key not only to have the lessons that we grew up in the streets of Little Village, but also to ensure that we have a seat in the room as those decisions are being made that impact the livelihoods of ourselves, of our family, and of our friends, and of our community.
Great, thank you, Rodrigo. Senator, would you speak on that, please?
I literally will have to publish an encyclopedia of the lessons and the things that I carry with me that I've learned from the neighborhood, and also, from my family. I think one of the most important ones that I use, especially in my role, is to don't ever let anybody punk you out. I think it's being a woman of color, being Latina in politics and in policy, in a place where most policymakers are still white men, even though our numbers might be growing. It's one of those things that I've had conversations with, both with, like other Latina legislators. Like I think in the entire country, there's about 126 Latina legislators in 50 states. And I don't know if it actually included Puerto Rico, but that should tell you something, that we still have minuscule numbers compared to other communities, but also just compared to white men who are in power. And again, like, we have a good group here in the state of Illinois, but again, it's never enough. But in a lot of these places, and for me, when, I was thinking about this question, I remember very vividly my first year in the House, which was last year, before I moved over to the Senate, that my intention when I entered the House, because I was appointed, was to actually learn, was to try to learn the ropes before, I kind of really got out there, because I have a mouth on me, and, I'm not afraid to use it. And that really wasn't the case. It was kind of like, you're going to take on some really hefty bills, and, because the time calls for it. Donald Trump is after our communities, and you might not be in Congress, but you're in the state legislature, and you can at least try to fight to protect immigrant communities in the state of Illinois. And, having been an immigrant rights organizer up until the point I got appointed into the House, I said, all right, we're going to do this. And we're going to fight, people who are trying to take wages away from, low-income folks in the state. And on one of my bills, I had a Republican senator, and this isn't all Republicans. Like, I've actually gotten to know other Republicans where we've been able to meet on certain issues. But there is a group of, Republican House members who, are very problematic. And one of them on the House floor was very clear about saying what he thought about Mexicans and immigrants in this country, that we were rapists and murderers. And I'm not a person I'm very passionate, and my passion like is going to come out in one or two ways. I'm either going to use a punching bag, or like it's going to come out in my words. And I'll be honest with you, there's a video that's kind of floating around in the internet about it. And it's really hard for me to watch, just because like I still remember those emotions in that moment where I just wanted to run across the aisle and, go learn, show some other things that I also learned in Little Village as well. But I said, you know what, I'm not going to let this man punk me out, because number one, I didn't come here to play. But number two, like, I'm not about to go back to my community and act like, walk back with like a dog with my tail between my legs. Like I'm going to prove to him, and I'm going to prove to the world that you don't mess with us. And so I hit back at him with his own words. And I was like, you don't get to use that xenophobic rhetoric here, because I'm in this hall with you. We here, like, we're equals. You don't get to talk down to me and say less of me because of whatever crazy assumptions you think that Donald Trump is feeding into your mind because you think is right. And I think that's kind of like the thing that, and it's such a back and forth in terms of the dichotomy of like women in just like in our society, and in sort of like gender roles, where like we sometimes, like, unfortunately, the archetypes of like, the santa, or like, the sexy whatever, especially with Latina women. And for me, like, I'm constantly having to deal with all of these like barrages of like who I'm supposed to be. And it's like, no, I'm going to be who I am, because this is who I am. And I'll be damned. And again, apologies if, I use other, language. But I'll be damned if I go back to my neighborhood and have somebody try to punk me out on something, especially somebody who knows nothing about nothing, and knows nothing about my community. So no, you don't get to talk like that, and you don't get to talk over me, and you don't get to talk for me. I'm going to talk for me. And that's, I think, the most important thing that I've been able to really be able to get across in my work that does follow me is I talk for myself and I represent my community, but I'm a conduit for those voices, because there's a lot more people where I come from. There's a lot more people from Little Village that have voices, that have the emotional intelligence and the whatever, book intelligence to be able to do, but they have so much more. And at the end of the day, like, you don't get to tell us who we are. We're going to tell you who we are. So those are like some of the things that I really incorporate in my work, constantly, that I think like folks sometimes are like, where do you get that fire from? And it's like, it's not like it's there naturally because I am who I am, but it's there because when I go back home, I see the realities of what people are going through. And the thing is, I'm also still going through that. Mm-hmm. Like, I might be a legislator, but when it comes to healthcare, like, my mom is battling cancer and we're having to navigate the healthcare system. When it comes to, having working class parents, like my dad works in plantscaping, like he's still a laborer. Like, when it comes to my grandparents are on Medicaid and Medicare. So like all of these things, when people want to make assumptions of, again, like, you are who you are because of your title, but then also you are who you are because of the color of your skin, because of your gender and all of these things. It's like, no, let me pause you here. I'm still a human being, but I'm going to tell you who I am.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Jackie.
I would say one of the things that I've learned from Little Village is to be resilient. Our immigrant community has gone through so much, leaving poverty conditions in Mexico to come here, and in many cases continue living in poverty, working low wage and risky jobs. Mm-hmm. And I think there's also this misconception among immigrants that if you're born here, if you're a U.S. born American, right, that you have it easier. But the truth is that our young people are going through so much. We're going to public schools that are disinvested in or are closing. There are very few job and academic opportunities or opportunities for advancement that open up for our generations. And we're dealing with an identity crisis too. We feel that we're not fully accepted as Americans, like we can't just blend in with the mainstream, right? But at the same time, we're not necessarily, as Mexican, as somebody who was born in Mexico, obviously. So we're struggling with, learning who we are and defining what is our role in our community and in this country. But I think that because of the strong families that we come from, we've just learned to kind of roll with the punches and figure it out as we go. And I think that's something that I have applied in my work. I didn't go to journalism school, but here I am as a journalist working for very well-respected publications. And it's something that I had to figure out on my own because I didn't have, mentors within my family or people who had gone to college or ever been salaried in their life. But I saw this need for community and ethnic media coming out of Little Village. We needed media that would speak to our experiences and to our needs. And I found, I devised a way to provide that service to my community. So I would say resilience and work ethic are probably the two most important values that I've adopted from Little Village and from my family, that wherever you go, you have to work your way up. We're not entitled to anything. And the work that you put in, you're going to see the results that you're looking for. Let's see what else. And humility, I would say, as many of us, quote unquote, make it in this country, where we're suddenly wearing a suit, we're suddenly getting a steady paycheck, we're coming out in the media and things like that. It's really easy for things to get to our heads, for us to, feel perhaps more important or more valuable than our working class counterparts. But mi familia es de rancho, right? Muy humildes. And that's something that I take everywhere that I go. So even as I'm walking into an all-white newsroom full of classist and low-key racist people, I treat everyone as my equal. We try to see eye to each other. I'm never looking down. And even in my reporting, I treat every interviewee, every subject as my equal. So these are some of the values that I apply to my work.
Great, thank you, Jackie. We have about 5 minutes before we get into the Q&A session here from the questions that we get submitted from the people that are participating. And if folks have any questions, please submit them via Twitter to Mex Talks or the YouTube or on the YouTube chat as well. I'm going to jump around here really quickly because I think you said something, Jackie, that just struck with me about your career and choices, and that you hadn't studied journalism, but here you are as a journalist. But I do want to just get a better sense of folks, what inspired you to your current profession, and what is the path that you took to get there? And I really want folks to know that these are people from the neighborhood that are doing amazing things, and that if there are younger generations that are going to be viewing this, that are on watching this or viewing it later, that they will feel inspired about your journeys as well. So why don't we start with Celina Villanueva?
I'm laughing because this is not a job I ever envisioned myself having. And Edgar knows this because we've had these conversations before. And I think a lot of people around me have known this. My intention was never to run for office. My intention was to never be the person that's in this position. I've been a longtime organizer. I started working in the nonprofit world at 14. And that was because of my mom, because my mom, when we were younger, went to college. She had finished high school, but had my sister very, very close thereafter, and then had my brother, and then me a few years later. And so, again, we were a working class family, but my mom said, we need more. We can't survive on me doing 2 jobs and my dad doing 2 jobs. That's not enough. So she went back to college and eventually got her master's degree. And really that's kind of the trajectory that changed us. And she got into the nonprofit world. So, it's really funny because I run across people all the time who are still oh, you're Sarah's daughter. And it used to piss me off to no end because I'm I'm always going to be Sarah's daughter or Alex's sister. And now they're oh, you're Celina's brother or Celina's mom. But I still love it when people are you're Sarah's daughter, because it's one of the things in terms of her legacy. and what she's done in the community and what she's contributed, not because of anything other than the fact that like it's our community, and for us that was important, and that was something that I think I always took with me, in the sense of like this is our home, and we're gonna stay here. And so, you know, for me, it really was organization, doing nonprofit work, after school programming with young people. Like that was my biggest thing. And you know, it went from that to issues work. Like I worked on marriage equality. I worked on, you know, raising the minimum wage, on immigrant rights issues, you know, and I started to kind of get my foot wet in terms of politics, but behind the scenes, because I wanted to be a campaign manager. I wanted to be a political director, because for me, and to work on policy, because I was like, every time that I walk into these meetings or look at, you know, campaigns, it's always men and it's always white men. And it always was a problem to me. And I was like, we have so much more. Like, I'm the type of person, I do believe that every aspect of our lives, whether we want to believe it or not, is political and has been politicized. But we also have to make the choice of whether what we're going to allow to happen or not. And we also have voices. Regardless of our immigration status, we still have a right to speak up and to say what we say and how we feel. And so for me, it really was that. And my goal was to, again, work on policy, be, you know, involved in politics. And to do that, like I was literally working on a promotion at my job before the opportunity came up to get appointed as a state representative. And it was really hard for me to decide to leave my job, because I loved the work that I was doing. We were making great strides and had passed some really great legislation. But I also knew the reality. In 2016, when Donald Trump won the election, I was sitting in a room full of mixed status individuals because we had worked our butts off to try to get out the vote. And by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I knew what was going to happen. And it was the most devastating thing. And again, I was born in this country. I am a citizen. My mom is a naturalized citizen. My siblings are citizens. My dad is the only one that's a legal permanent resident. But sitting in that room and knowing what was to come, and having the foresight to be able to see what was going to happen because of Donald Trump, was the most devastating thing that I ever experienced in my life. And I've experienced some really devastating shit. But to know that, and to say like, I can do something at least on the state level, and to try to fight to create precedent for other states to be able to do stuff. The fact that, like, you know, we have policy that like we passed Medicaid for undocumented seniors over the age of 65, which we're going to fight for more. And we're the first state in the country to do that. Speaks to like why I made the decision, because I want to be around these tables, but I also want to open and like literally knock down the door for more people to be at these tables to be able to get this work done, because I'm tired of policy being drafted and made by people who don't look like us, thinking that they know what's best for us.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. Appreciate it. And just wanted to ask the same question to Jackie, if you would mind speaking on that, please. And we are pressing up against it, so if you can keep it short, that would really be helpful. Sorry about that.
So the question is, what inspired us to our current profession, right?
Yeah.
So I was the first in my family to go to college, to go away to college even. I went to New York for 4 years to get my bachelor's. And the only reason I left was because it was cheaper for me to go out of state than for me to stay here and go to U of I or another local school. So I left, but I was extremely homesick. It was a culture clash. I missed home. And whenever I would Google Little Village, the results that would come up were very narrow. It was either about some immigration raids or gang violence. So I'm like, that's messed up. I'm like, I know that there's more to Little Village. I come from there. I know there are great aspects, very inspirational people, people who are creating change and doing positive things for the community. And these are things that we need to, first of all, become aware of and start highlighting and upholding. And so I don't know if people know, but I'm one of the administrators behind La Villita page on Facebook, which has been around for over 10 years, has about 150,000 followers, mostly from the neighborhood, past and present. And there we started having conversations that needed to happen conversations about the gang violence, first of all. I felt like when I first started the page, many nonprofit organizations wanted to turn a blind eye to the violence that was happening. At least nobody was speaking up. And so we started to post the shootings that were happening on a weekly basis as they were happening. And all of this information was being collected by the neighbors themselves. So this was completely self-sustainable in the sense that it was by the community, for the community, as a way to keep each other informed. And the better informed that we are, the better that we can make decisions about our community. So I figured that there was really no way that we could tackle the violence unless we understood the trends of the violence.
Sure.
So that was one thing that we were doing, posting the shootings, but also posting for free opportunities that local organizations and churches were putting out there. Really any local news, any local happenings,
Sure.
we were putting it on the page. And so that really inspired me to start reporting, doing some original reporting, and to start seeking out trainings in journalism, how to interview, how to work a camera. And then I started seeking internships and fellowships and things like that. And slowly I got my foot in the door at, respected media companies. And my work has revolved around highlighting those stories that come from the Mexican community or that pertain to our reality. And it hasn't been easy because as I mentioned earlier, most of the media in Chicago is very white and very classist. And even though they take the liberty of coming into our neighborhoods and covering our realities, when it comes time for us to cover our own communities, they say that we're biased or that we have an agenda or that we're being activists. And so that's a perspective that I've been trying to squash ever since I've entered the field of journalism. And thankfully, we are now seeing new crops of young Latino up and coming journalists who are now covering our communities. And I hope that it keeps going.
Thank you, Jackie. And Rodrigo?
Yes, I stand on the shoulders of giants like Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and even Rudy Lozano here in Chicago. And I say that because my perspective and my purpose has always been influenced about helping others, dedicating my life in service of others. We as a community, we're not here to threaten. We're not here to beg. We are here to participate. We are here to contribute to the vitality of this great nation, from the brave men and women to the small business owners on 26th Street, to the working people in our factories and working in landscaping and construction, across the city of Chicago and across the state of Illinois. Mexicanos and Mexicanas, we protect neighborhoods, we guide young people as teachers and as mentors, and we boost economic growth, whether we be business owners, shop owners, or even operators. I always like to tell folks, immigration started at Plymouth Rock. The immigrant community has a long and proud history of service to America, and we have not hesitated to defend her honor and has sworn allegiance to this nation through military service and sacrifice. I could tell you that the immigrant community has established, devotion, as evidenced by the dozens of Medal of Honor recipients of Mexican descent. It's about telling our story. I'll just leave it. One looks out. There's this tiny town on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's called Silvis, Illinois. Very tiny town, where 8 soldiers of Mexican American descent, all who lived in one street, this little single street, all died in service to this nation during World War II. In addition, this singular street has of about 25 different homes, has sent over 100 residents into service since World War II, all Mexican and Mexican Americans. This is a story, this story is not unique. It is a story of us. Your story is your power. I don't believe you have to cower to power. Everyone has their own self-identity. You have your own self-identity. And I think it's beautiful to be Mexican. And I think we have to utilize that representation and that purpose to continue to provide economic opportunity for others. And that's where I have always tried to be, at the intersectionality of finance and public service, and using access to capital, whether it's student loan, mortgages, business loans, venture capital, private equity, to give an opportunity for those who have not been given opportunity for systemic and structural barriers that have existed in our community for decades. So that's a little bit about what drives me.
That's great. And so we're going to take a question from one of the participants, and they asked if you can talk about the intersection of mental health and identity and its impact in the imposter syndrome. So I'm not sure where we would like to start. If Jackie, Rodrigo, or Senator Villanueva, feel free to have at it. And actually, we only have a couple more minutes before we have to wrap up.
So I can talk about that for a little bit. I'm actually somebody who's been seeing a therapist since I was 17 years old, on and off. And I'm very public about it, because I feel like if we're not, and part of my experience was because of the strides that I was able to make with my therapist, it actually opened up the minds of people in my family, and people in my family opening up and saying like, oh, this is actually a thing that can help, and not just something that like white people and rich people do just because, they can. Mm-hmm. And, my mom's been in therapy, my dad, brothers, cousins, and it really has kind of changed and shifted, like, both our experience. I'll be honest with you. I come from a family that has experienced a lot of trauma. I think the immigration story for most of us is a very traumatic story. Going from what you knew, speaking and being with people that spoke your language, poverty is traumatic. And again, like I like, Jackie was talking about, her family, like my grandfather, my dad's side, was a bracero that I didn't know he was a bracero until he died. Mm-hmm. And because of some other family stuff that came to light, that's how we found out, or I found out. My dad didn't even remember. And so, like, in terms of sort of like the intersectionality of mental health, for me in the legislature, that's actually one of my priorities. It's one of the things that I worked on and pushed when we were working on the legalization of cannabis. There's 10% of the taxation of cannabis that has to go into mental health services. That's because of me. Because I said it was like, we're going to put money into substance abuse, which is awesome. That's great. People have issues and we need to put more money into that. But the truth of the matter is, if we don't get to the root causes of why people self-medicate, we're never going to actually put enough money that's going to be able to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And even then, we still need additional funding for mental health. And we need a pipeline for mental health individuals coming from our communities, because cultural competency and language access is a very big deal. When it came to me, I'll be honest with you, I've dealt with imposter syndrome my entire life, whether it was on the college campus when I was at U of I, or whether it was even coming back into the workplace. Like, I entered the professional world in a recession. I graduated in 2008, and literally, I think by 2010 and 2011, at some point, like, I've had to be on unemployment before. And like, what that does to somebody who's the idea of like, you are your job, it was really difficult. But the truth of the matter is, every step of the way, having professionals that have helped me with my mental health has been key for me.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that story. It's very powerful and very uplifting. I think for a lot of folks that are experiencing those things, they need to hear that this is something that's common in our families, and they need to be able to go ahead and feel comfortable openly discussing these things. Jackie or Rodrigo, would you like to weigh in?
I'd just like to say that, as Mexicans, we're a colonized people, right? And so we carry a chip on our shoulders as to, how good we are compared to other folks. A lot of us, not me, but a lot of us aspire to proximity to whiteness, being close to white people as an indicator of success. And it also manifests in our professional careers, right? As we're going into spaces that don't look like us, many times we would like to blend into those environments. And so I mentioned earlier that we have this struggle with identity. I think that also we struggle with defining success in this country. Many times we define success as, like I said earlier, going to live next to white people, going to the suburbs, leaving the neighborhood and never looking back. So I do think that we do need to have, first of all, we need to learn our history. We need to know where we come from, and that we have a very tragic history, and that throughout our history there are oppressors and there are people who have been oppressed, and that you have to take a stance, whether you're with the oppressors or you're with the oppressed. And how are you going to continue to advocate for your people, even in this country? So we've left Mexico. It seems like we're going to be here for generations to come. What is the vision that we have for ourselves as a collective? I think those are questions that we need to define, and we need to help our young people, define those things as well. I do think that there's a lack of guidance and a lack of mentorship from our older generations. Our young people many times feel lost, and they don't know who to turn to find the answers to those big life questions. And they'll find a sense of comfort in gangs or in activities that are not productive or are self-destructive. Sure. So I do think that there's a lot of conversation, a lot of learning, mutual learning that needs to happen within, for us to really thrive as a self-sustainable community.
Thank you, Jackie. Rodrigo?
Yeah, I'll just make it, I'll add three very tiny items. I am all about mind, body, and spirit. You have to continue to nourish it in a number of different ways. So I'm glad that conversation about mental health is being discussed here today, because it is needed and it's very prevalent in our community. The second thing is, it is key that when you are in the room, as Jackie alluded to earlier, that we are advocating for those that are coming behind us. And then not just because we've attained power or success or influence or riches or whatever it may be, that we forget about those who helped us along the way, and hopefully paving the pathway for others. And then the last thing I would just mention, I would just tell you that one of the easiest ways to help overcome the imposter syndrome is by bringing more of us into the room and ensure that we have access, that we have representation, and that we have opportunity to ensure that we can do as much as for others as we have done for ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Let's get into a rapid response question, and just one word answer or just very short response here. Is there a song, whether it's English or Mexican, or Mexican artist, that takes you back to growing up in Little Village? So let's start with Senator Villanueva, since she's laughing.
I'm laughing because it's like a combination of anything Los Tigres del Norte with anything like hip hop. It's right. That's Little Village to me. It's always this like mix.
Great, thank you. Jackie?
I'm thinking of Un Puño de Tierra de Antonio Aguilar. It's just something you always hear at family parties, backyard parties, and it speaks to al final de todo, somos un puño de tierra. We all are reduced to, to nothing essentially.
Yeah, great, thank you. Rodrigo?
I was going to say Tres Veces Mojado by Los Tigres del Norte, but since the senator took it, I'll say Sangre de Indio, because it reminds me of our ancestral blood in Mexico, whether it's Aztec, Mayan, or even Los Tepehuanos. Great.
Well, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Senator Villanueva, thank Rodrigo, and thank Jackie for agreeing to be a part of this panel. It was really great to get your insights and perspectives. And so we thank you very much for helping us close out Mex Talks 2020. And I just really quickly, I also wanted to ask all of our folks that are viewing to leave them with three things to think about. First and foremost, if you haven't done so already, please fill out the census form. Make sure that you get it in. I think tomorrow is the last day for the census count to be completed. So please do so. And then second is election day is fast approaching. I think there's 35 days. Make sure that you confirm your voter registration, you're eligible to vote. But also more importantly, that you have a plan to vote, whether you're gonna vote by mail, and if so, make sure you request a ballot, or you're gonna vote early, know exactly where your early voting location will be. And three, if you're gonna vote on election day, make sure that you're prepared for that day as well. It's so important for our community to show up, right? And then last but not least, if you have participated in any of the other sessions with Mex Talks 2020 in this virtual format, and if you found the information useful and beneficial and brought a lot of, it illuminated many things for yourself, I would encourage you to please go on latinospro.org/donate/ and make a contribution. No amount of money is too small. No amount of money is ever too big either. So feel free whatever you can give. And we look forward to continuing in with Mex Talks next year, whether in person, hopefully, or if not, in this virtual format. Thanks, everybody. And turn it back over to the folks at Latinos Progresando.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias.
That concludes our program. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors and to you at home for being here. To learn more about other events in the Mex Talks series, go to www.latinospro.org/Mex Talks. You can also watch past Mex Talks videos on Latinos Progresando's YouTube channel. To support LP and the amazing work they do for our community, you can make a donation at latinospro.org/donate. You can even sign up for a monthly pledge. Make sure you follow Latinos Progresando at Latinos Pro on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter to always have the latest. Thank you.